Dave Talks Comics, Episode 83, Justice League Unlimited, Initiation and Fearful Symmetry. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is definitely not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comic books and cartoons, I'm going to spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about two of the early episodes from Justice League Unlimited. That is Initiation, which was the very first episode, and Fearful Symmetry, which was the sixth episode. Both of these tie into the Cadmus story arc, both of which I felt deserved a little more attention. At this point, I've covered I've covered the end of the first two seasons of Justice League Unlimited, or what on DVD is considered to be Season 1 of Justice League Unlimited. I'm going to go back at this point and talk about some of the early episodes that I think I went over very briefly on some previous episodes of Dave Talks Comics. Some early episodes of Justice League Unlimited. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. And there's a good reason why. And that reason basically is that there's actually, if you watch it from the beginning, it may not be apparent unless you're watching it for the second time or the third time. But there's actually a lot of foreshadowing in those early episodes of things to come. They look like little one-off episodes. They aren't really connected to the Cadmus storyline, but at the same time, what they're doing is they're introducing characters and introducing relationships that will later continue to run through this whole Cadmus storyline. So the first episode opens with, it's called Initiation, and it opens with Green Arrow. You know, in that scene that happens before the credits, Green Arrow is dealing with a robbery of a mini-mart. And he's doing fine, but then Green Lantern shows up to help out, and Green Lantern being, of course, John Stewart, because that's the Green Lantern from the Justice League cartoons. Of course, in the comic books, there were several Green Lanterns, and John Stewart was not the first one. So Green Lantern picks him up and takes him to the Watchtower, and actually, Green Lantern doesn't take him to the Watchtower, but they are transported to the Watchtower by the transporter system that they have. Because there's a big meeting going on at the Watchtower. And I should say that the Watchtower, I call it the Watchtower here. Sometimes I'll refer to it as the Justice League satellite or just the satellite. And so there's a big meeting going on. But before that, you get the credits scene. And the interesting thing to note about the credits scene is that Hawkgirl is not in the credits. And if you remember the ending of the second season of Justice League was the big story, Star-Crossed, in which Hawkgirl, Shairo's people came to Earth and were going to destroy the Earth. At first they were going to take it over, and then their plan was to destroy it. And Hawkgirl sided with them at first, and eventually she went against her people, but she was kicked out of the League anyway and so she doesn't show up here. But she will, of course, come back before the end, before these 24 episodes are up, but not in this episode. So back on the satellite, the League has expanded, and that's That's why they've changed the name from Justice League to Justice League Unlimited. And there's all sorts of heroes there, most of whom I'm at least passingly familiar with, although most of whom only get cameo appearances. I don't think any of them really get anything more than cameo appearances, other than the ones who play a role in this episode. So Martian Manhunter, Superman gives a pep talk. There's all of these heroes there. I'm not sure exactly how many, probably 30 or more, in addition to the six being, of course, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, and the Flash. Superman gives a pep talk, and he makes it clear that Martian Manhunter is going to be the guy in charge up on the satellite, the one coordinating everything. Now, on the side, Green Arrow is making it clear that he doesn't want to be there. He makes statements like that he fights for the little guy, and you guys are fighting big monsters, and so I don't really belong here. And so you've got that little dynamic going on, and there's going to be more of that towards the end of the episode. And there's also a bit of role reversal in this, because, well, let me keep going about what happens in this episode, and I'm not going to get too detailed. I'm going to try not to get too detailed. So there's a problem going on in Chiang Mai, which is supposed to be somewhere in Eastern Asia. It kind of, the way they portray it seems like it's a little like North Korea, something along those lines. Anyway, there's some nuclear situation going on there. So Martian Manhunter tasks Green Lantern, actually Green Lantern volunteers, and Martian Manhunter tells him to take Captain Atom and Supergirl with him to deal with this. And once again, these are characters who are going to play a big role, just like Green Arrow will. Also, Captain Atom and Supergirl are all going to show up at various points and important points in this first 24 episodes of Justice League Unlimited through the Cadmus storyline. So Captain Atom at this point, Captain Atom and Supergirl are like two, diametrically opposed personalities. Captain Atom is Mr. Law and Order, and Supergirl is like the party girl. And when they find out they're going to Chiang Mai, he's like, well, Americans aren't supposed to go there. And she's like, is that near Daytona Beach? So you get these two completely different responses from them. And so there's a bit of, acrimony, they're not getting along, and so they aren't really functioning as a team. And the other person who tags along, is Green Arrow, because he didn't like the idea of getting teleported up to the satellite, and he doesn't want to get teleported back. And since they're going down in one of these planes, one of these javelins, I guess spaceship plane type things, he wants to tag along with them. So they say, sure, we'll drop you off on the way back, once we're done dealing with this situation. So he's not really there to help them with the situation, but of course, that's not how things work out in the end. I mentioned that Supergirl and Captain Atom don't really get along, and her reactions to him are priceless. And I guess in some ways his reactions to her are kind of priceless too. They're both funny, without intending to be funny. I mean, I'm sure that the creators of the show intended it as humor, but they're not trying to be funny. The characters aren't trying to be funny. So they try and deal with this nuclear situation, which is this nuclear robot that the military of Chiang Mai has created, which has kind of gotten out of control and is just killing people and destroying things. It's this huge robot, probably a couple 100 feet tall. And the team members, Green Lantern, Captain Atom, Supergirl, try to deal with it unsuccessfully, basically on their own unsuccessfully. And Green Arrow, helps out, but of course he's the only one who doesn't really have any superpowers. He's, just an archer with these really cool arrows, but not a whole lot more. So, and then there's this one cool moment where Green Lantern gets injured by this nuclear monster who looks a little like Brimstone from the Legends comic book series from the mid-'80s. That was like just after Crisis on Infinite Earths. But I don't think it is. It's probably based on it, but I don't think it is supposed to be the exact same creation, because that was a creation of Darkseid's, I think. So getting back to to the fight. So Green Lantern gets badly injured by this monster who I don't think has ever given a name. And when they've got him bandaged up, they're back in the Javelin, this spaceship airplane that they flew to Chiang Mai, and he calls out when Supergirl says something like, "I'm going to go and take care of this guy." She's like, "No, Shaira, you need to have a plan," and they just kind of let that float past. They don't really dwell on it too much, but Shaira is Hawkgirl, and there was a romance between Green Lantern and Hawkgirl in the previous season, and of course, which fell apart when she got kicked out. He considered what she did a betrayal, in part because of what she did, in part because he was a Marine, and he definitely takes this kind of stuff loyalty very seriously, and so it's interesting that he calls out Shaira's name, even though she's not there. Obviously, he's talking to Supergirl at that point. So they make another swipe at beating this nuclear creature, and first Captain Atom is taken down, and then Supergirl is taken down, and then it's just Green Arrow, and of course Green Arrow is the one who saves the day in the end. And that's all I'm going to say about that part. If you really want to know exactly how he does it, well, it shouldn't be too hard to figure it out, if you think about what he's good at. You probably need to know a little bit about how the creature needed to be taken down. But I thought it was neat that Green Arrow is the least powered of them, and in the end, he's the one who saves the day. And also, by the same token, he's the one who wanted to be the street-level hero fighting the street-level villains, and he's the one who takes down this big monster. And they make a point of that, and they emphasize that at the end, because once they get back to the satellite, and so obviously they don't just drop him off. They take them all back to the satellite. Captain Atom has to be his containment suit has been torn, and he has to get a new containment suit. And I think Green Lantern is in a wheelchair or some type of. It may not actually have wheels, but he's obviously badly injured. But there's this moment at the end where Green Arrow is talking to Batman, and Batman's saying, look, you're the one who took out this big monster. We need people like you, and if nothing else, we need you. Someone like you will keep us honest. And I believe that's the exact quote. And even after hearing that, Green Arrow isn't completely convinced that he should stay. But then he sees Black Canary walk by, and he's like, well, maybe I'll be back. And once again, this is cool because this is more foreshadowing. Black Canary, Green Arrow, Captain Atom, Supergirl are all characters who were not in the original series, but in Justice League, but all characters who, once they've expanded, become part of this secondary group of characters who play an important role in this series. And that's why I think it was worth it to go back and say some more, because when I first talked about this, I gave it maybe a minute or two on this episode, and I thought that I should talk a lot more about this. So it's a cool episode by itself, but when you put it in the context of the whole 24-episode arc, it's extremely cool. And so that's all I have to say about Justice League, the first episode of Justice League Unlimited, Initiation. Although it's clear to me now that the Cadmus story arc, or at least the seeds for it, begin with the first episode of Justice League Unlimited, the first time I watched it, as I see it, it really didn't begin at that time. I felt that it didn't begin until the 6th episode, which is called Fearful Symmetry. I've probably watched this episode more than any other episode, more times than any other episode. I'm pretty sure I've seen it at least half a dozen times. I have it on DVD. I can watch it through Netflix. I purchased it through Vudu at one point, another one of those streaming services, before it was available through Netflix. The episode opens with what you later find out is a dream. This is before the credits sequence, where Supergirl is chasing the scientist, who you later learn his name is Dr. Hallstrom. And basically she's chasing him. Then there's these people, these guys, paramilitary type or military type guys, on these flying, coming at her, firing weapons at her, and she has to chase them off. Eventually, she tracks down the scientist in his lab, and there's this great line. And the whole time, it sounds like her, it looks like her, but her voice has much more menace in it than Supergirl usually does. And there's this line at the end, just before they go to the credits, where she says, "You can scream now if you want," and she's cornered the scientist, and you see her eyes starting to glow like she's going to turn her heat vision on him, and then the next scene it flashes out, and all you see is the outside of the building they're in, and you hear him screaming. And I mean, that's another one of those moments that I really like, because it's something that you wouldn't normally see in these cartoons years before this, where they're really taking an adult tact on this. They're obviously not crossing the line and showing people get killed, but they are certainly implying it. So Supergirl, the very end of that, before the credit scene, is Supergirl waking up in bed, seeing that she's blasted holes in the ceiling with her heat vision and being very scared, not knowing what she just saw. So after the credits, you get Supergirl on the satellite talking to the satellite, the watchtower, talking to Green Arrow about this. And I don't think it's 100% clear why she turns to Green Arrow as opposed to her cousin, Superman. But she's talking to Green Arrow. Eventually, the Question gets involved, and all three of them go to investigate. Now, I should say that there's a nice moment in the Justice League on the Watchtower in the cafeteria, and over the course of at least these two seasons, and maybe also the third season, I haven't gone back to watch that yet, there are a number of good scenes in the cafeteria. I'm not sure whose idea this was, but they did it nicely. And there's also a cameo by Black Canary, who I mentioned when I talked about Initiation, how Black Canary is somebody who, of course, was tied to Green Arrow in the comic books, and at this point they haven't been introduced yet, but he is interested in her, and at one point, he says something about having a dream, then he turns and he looks at Black Canary. She's not looking his way, so she doesn't see him, but it's a nice moment, and it's also kind of foreshadowing things that are going to happen. Not necessarily exactly what's going to happen, but that there is going to be some relationship between the two of them. You also get to see the Questions board for the first time, and this is also the first episode that the Question shows up in. And of course the Question becomes part of this group that are very vital, along with Green Arrow, along with Supergirl and Black Canary and the Huntress and Captain Atom, all of whom play an important role in the whole Cadmus story arc, who aren't part of the original, who weren't in the original Justice League cartoon in the first two seasons of Justice League, but are part of this whole Cadmus storyline. In an effort to figure out what it is that Supergirl's experiencing, because she had actually also gone to the Martian Manhunter and asked him for help, asked him to probe her mind and figure out what it was, and he couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. So in an effort to figure out what is wrong with her, she and the Question and Green Arrow go to Star Labs, and they pay a visit there. They talk to Dr. Hamilton, who was also a character in the Superman the Animated Series. And there are references made to the episode, to the final story from Superman the Animated Series, Legacy, which was the one where Superman was brainwashed by Darkseid and came back to take over the Earth, and Supergirl was also in that story. And the references in this case are made that she was injured then, and because part of her dream was that she was attacked by some machine, And when she was chasing the scientist, and Dr. Hamilton shows her this machine, which is the machine that was in her dream. And he explains that this is the machine that operated on her that they used to operate on her when she was injured in the Legacy story. And and so he says, no, there's nothing, you must just be having dreams, but bit by bit, over the course of this story, things start to happen that start to indicate there's something to her dreams. After they leave Star Lab, they're quickly attacked by guys who jump out of a couple helicopters plus a robot, and they see the robot seems to be going after Supergirl. And they fight off those guys, but there's still no explanation as to what that was all about. It's very interesting because it happens right after they leave Star Labs. So it's right outside Star Labs. Nobody comes outside of Star Labs to investigate. The next visit they make is to General Hardcastle. And he was apparently, I don't recall exactly, and I haven't watched the episode recently, the Legacy story, but apparently he was the one in charge during Legacy. And since then, he has retired, and so they go to visit him to see what he might know and to get some information from him. Now, what's interesting there is that as soon as they leave, they do get some information from him, but as soon as they leave, and the information they get from him is that basically the government is scared of the League. That the government, ever since the events that happened during Legacy, the government is scared of the League. That they're scared that Superman could go rogue, or somebody as powerful or close to as powerful as Superman could go rogue and kill all kinds of people, wreak all kinds of damage. And so they are looking for their own solution, their own metahumans. But they leave General Hardcastle, but as soon as they leave, Supergirl's duplicate shows up. And she isn't an exact duplicate of Supergirl. I mean, she doesn't look exactly like Supergirl does. She looks kind of like Power Girl does from the comic books. And her name is Taya, or at the end you learn her name is Galatea. And it's implied that she kills the general, but that's not entirely clear, because unlike the scene where in Supergirl's dream, where the scientist screams, you don't get that in this one. After a quick stop back at the satellite, Supergirl and Green Arrow visit Nuvogen after hearing a story that Dr. Hallstrom, who they now see a picture of, and Supergirl's like, well, that's the guy from my dream. He works for this company called Nuvogen, so they break into Nuvogen. And there, at that point, it has become clear that there's some sort of psychic link between Supergirl and this clone of her, whose name is Galatea. And Galatea, you learn, is slightly older. She's been aged to a point where she's slightly older than Supergirl. She has kind of shoulder-length blonde hair. She doesn't have the long blonde hair. And she wears a white costume, very similar to Power Girl from the comic books. The problem that Galatea is having is that she shares this link with Supergirl. So they somehow are sharing memories. And so she wants this to end, and her solution is that she should kill Supergirl. So they get lured into this. Green Arrow and Supergirl break into Nuvogen. They're looking through the computers for information. Then they hear somebody go running past. They see Galatea. She runs into this room. They follow her, and it's this hollow chamber, as in hologram chamber. And it creates this city, and then this fight breaks out between Supergirl and Galatea. Green Arrow tries to help out, tries to take part, but he gets knocked out rather quickly. The Question has been conducting his own investigations, but then he shows up to help out. But then somebody, and honestly, I don't know if I ever really noticed this because this happened so quickly in this episode. It's a few seconds, but somebody outside of the building that they're in, the Nuvogen building, has been monitoring this and sees what's going on. And it's unclear who it is because you only see a silhouette, but I have to wonder, based on the fact that I've seen this before and the shape of this person's head, if this is supposed to be Lex Luthor. But somebody blows up the building, and at the same time Galatea is screaming as if she's in communication with somebody, or as if she knows that somebody's listening, that I can handle this, and don't take this away from me, that kind of stuff. In the end, they go back up to so the building blows up, they escape, they go back to the satellite, and this is the end of the episode. And the question speculates that Galatea exists because Superman went rogue, that he's the government's answer, that she, is the government's answer to Superman in case something happens again. And they call Professor Hamilton and they talk to Professor Hamilton and they ask him about genetic information, because when Supergirl or genetic material, because when Supergirl was operated on at Star Labs, they presumably would have had some samples from her, and Professor Hamilton's like, no, we destroy that stuff, we don't hold on to genetic material, and then they hang up, and immediately the next scene is Professor Hamilton going to visit Galatea, who is recuperating, who's been badly beaten up in her fight with Supergirl, and also presumably from the building blowing up, and he's saying, we're going to get you fixed up, don't you worry, and this stuff just blew my mind, and it's there at the very end when you learn that her full name is Galatea. But this just blew my little mind when I saw this the first time. It just, because instead of these one-off stories, you've got, they were just opening the door for all kinds of stuff and giving you a hint of what might be yet to come. And it wasn't clear at that point, I don't think, to me, that they were going to follow up on everything. And not every episode of Justice League Unlimited ties into this Cadmus story arc. But as I've said before, they do a great job with this stuff. And this was the beginning. This is where it all starts. And it works as a great standalone episode as well, just as this whole investigation, almost an X-Files-like episode where there's some conspiracy, something's going on, what's going on. And of course, like I said, it also introduces the question who becomes one of the major players in the whole Cadmus story arc on the League side of it. So on the whole, I think this is a great episode. I could watch this over and over again. And I have watched it quite a few times, of course, and I don't think that you should start here. I think you really should start with the first episode and watch all the way through. But this is a great episode, and this is where, as far as I'm concerned, it really starts to get good. A little more about these two episodes of Justice League Unlimited. First, I did talk about Initiation, the first episode, before. I talked about it on Dave Talks Comics episode 16, but I probably didn't spend more than 2 or 3 minutes talking about it. In fact, I only devoted about 6 or 7 minutes in total to talk about the first 4 episodes of Justice League Unlimited. As to the second episode that I talked about, Fearful Symmetry, there are allusions in that to an episode of Superman the Animated Series called Legacy. This is the cartoon. This is the episode. Well, actually, it's 2 episodes. It's a 2-parter. And this is the one where Superman had been brainwashed by Darkseid and comes to conquer the Earth. And Supergirl has to lead the forces that are fighting back against him. Professor Hamilton is in that episode. And I talked about this story on episode 39 of Dave Talks Comics. And I believe the entire episode was devoted to that. Now, as far as the characters that showed up in in episode in Fearful Symmetry, I had talked about, the first one that came up was Dr. Hallstrom. I tried to do some research, but he doesn't have any history. He must have just been created for this episode. But so I couldn't find anything on Dr. Hallstrom. And honestly, he doesn't have a very big part to play. It's an important part, but it's not a very big part to play in this episode. Professor Emil Hamilton, who works at Star Labs, does have a history. In fact, unlike some characters who were originally showed up in the cartoons and then later appeared in the comic books like Renee Montoya and Harley Quinn, Professor Hamilton first appeared in the comic books. He was created by Marv Wolfman and Jerry Ordway, and his first appearance was in Adventures of Superman number 424. This is his first appearance in Justice League Unlimited. He will appear a number of times before this series runs its course, and he also had a number of appearances in Superman, the animated series. He also appeared in some of the comic book adaptations. Well, they weren't all adaptations. They were comic books that were influenced by or based on the DC animated universe. For the most part, Superman comic books that are from the DC animated universe. The name Galatea comes from the story of Pygmalion. Pygmalion was a sculptor from the island of Cyprus. His story is told in Ovid's Metamorphoses, which were written about 2,000 years ago. He created a statue out of marble, I'm thinking, and he fell in love with the statue, and the statue came to life. Now, in Ovid's Metamorphoses, the statue is not given a name, but subsequently, as in about 1,700 years later, something like that, the name given to the statue has been Galatea. Galatea is a name that does appear in Greek mythology, but it doesn't appear in Greek mythology in connection to Pygmalion until 300 years ago or 350 years ago, something like that. But that's the origin of the name Galatea, and of course that's significant because in this story Galatea is revealed to be a clone of Supergirl, a clone created by Professor Hamilton. And over the course of the season, over the course of the Project Cadmus arc, you see there's definitely a feeling of affection, of love that Professor Hamilton has for Galatea, although it isn't a romantic one. It is more of a fatherly affection that he has for her, and which I believe is reciprocated by her. She sees him as her father, and I think I've discussed that a little bit in one of the previous episodes in which I talked about the final few episodes of the Cadmus story arc. That's it for episode 83 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter, @DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. You can subscribe to Dave Talks Comics through iTunes or Stitcher. Links can be found on the main page at davetalkscomics.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about issues 27 and 28 of All-Star Squadron. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.